Oh, hey friends, it's Josh Yeager, Santa Barbara dog walker, and trust and estates Epicurean, having fun walking and talking with Dodger, thinking about trust administration matters. We're going to talk today about a little subject called permissible deviation, the doctrine of permissible deviation, and how that works or is helpful when settling a trust or estate. So here's the big idea. A trust document is basically a contract between grandma and grandpa, the settlor, the trustee, the fiduciary, and the beneficiaries, the people that the trust was set up for. And the rule goes that you can deviate from the words that grandma and grandpa wrote if it doesn't hurt the beneficiaries, and it doesn't defeat the original purposes of the trust or the primary purposes of the trust. So this allows a trustee to make changes to the application or the implementation of a trust document during the administrative stage, the stage after grandma and grandma died and we're cutting checks to the kids. If there's some words that, or some restrictions that grandma and grandpa put in there that are just not helpful anymore because they didn't anticipate these fact patterns. And you do this with a writing where everyone agrees. It's called a non-judicial agreement. Non-judicial means a judge isn't involved. So it can just be done around a coffee table. And the family decides, hey, you know what? I know grandma and grandpa told us to keep the cabin in the trust until 2035, but we don't want to do that for these reasons. Because there's some facts that grandma and grandpa didn't know about when they wrote the trust in 2000. As a hypothetical. There's a bunch of others that I'll go over with you in this little walk and talk. But this is a really cool tool because trustees sometimes feel that they're stuck with the words that grandma and grandpa put, which they generally are, unless there's a deviation from those words that's permissible, that doesn't interfere with trust purposes and the beneficiaries acknowledge, and there's some sort of understanding that those original words, grandma and grandpa couldn't have anticipated the new facts. And so the trustee's being constrained from doing a good job because of the words. I'll give you some recent applications that we've had at Anados where we found this helpful. I led with the cabin hypo. You got the cabin, grandma and grandpa put the cabin in the trust up in Tahoe. The purpose of this trust was so that the family could enjoy the cabin. And the beneficiaries of the trust are the grandkids. Grandkids get the cabin, distribute it out of the trust in 2035. But what's happened is all of the family has died. And the grandkids, two brothers, are now the successor trustees of this trust that holds a cabin. And they are the beneficiaries of this trust. And it's like, do we really have to hold this cabin in trust until 2035? Like, can't we just terminate the trust and sell the cabin and wrap this thing up? Because we're really not Tahoe guys, we're more Mammoth guys. Yeah, sure. That's done under the doctrine of permissible deviation. And you make a little memo that says grandma and grandpa said this. They said keep the cabin in the trust until 2035, but they couldn't have anticipated that everyone would be dead other than the beneficiaries who were also the trustees. And the purpose of this was to preserve the cabin for the grandkids. And so we've kind of already accomplished that. So let's just wrap this thing up. The kids sign as trustees and beneficiaries, terminate the trust. That would be a permissible deviation. Another one that came up recently for us was the trust. Dad died. Trust said we're going to leave some money in trust for the boys. When they're 35 years old, the boys each get $250,000 outright from the trust. We're going to leave the bulk of the trust, of the corpus, in trust for the boys. But when they're 35, they can have a distribution of 200 grand. Well, one of the boys is already past 35. The other boy is 34. And it's like, well, can we just distribute him his money now? Trustee asks. He wants to start a business. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. Trust doc doesn't give any direction around why this 200 grand is being distributed. It's just an inheritance. There aren't any kind of like for the first home or to buy a business or to go to school. There's no language in the trust doc. So the trustee does a permissible modification or a permissible deviation from the trust terms and says, you know what? I'm not going to wait till 35. I'm going to cut the kid the check because I want him to have the same experience as his brother who's getting the check free of trust. And I'm going to deviate from this. The son who's 34 is a good kid, has a good education, has a good job. He's like, there's no risks of something bad happening. All the bennies sign off on it, including the brother that's getting the check. So all the beneficiaries need to acknowledge this. There have to be notices to them and opportunity to challenge. But if everyone's on the same boat, no sweat. Permissible deviation. So this is a really cool tool because it allows trustees to do their job, which is what they were anointed to do by the settlor, by grandma and grandpa. It allows them to deviate from the words that grandma and grandpa said in the trust, because grandma and grandpa couldn't have anticipated this new set of facts that make the administration harder or less equitable or for some reason not in the beneficiary's best interest, because grandma and grandpa wrote this thing 20 years ago and didn't think of setting it up, didn't think of this new fact pattern. Another example that happened about a year ago was the trust doc says that the beneficiary gets the net income from the trust distributed each year. Now, when the trust was set up, the settlor, grandma and grandpa, were thinking, yeah, like you can get like 7% on CDs. So there might be a couple of percent in administrative costs. But the settlor was thinking the kids or the beneficiaries are going to get like a 5% distribution rate from this trust because the prevailing interest rate at the time that grandma and grandpa set this thing up was CDs paid 7%. Now that tells you that it's been a long time since this trust was set up, because CDs haven't gotten 7% in decades and decades. So the trustee says, you know what, why don't we start to administer this trust as if it was a unit trust. In other words, let's distribute 5% per year from the trust, even though it says net income. The purpose of the trust is to provide a steady, stable income stream. And if we continue with the strict language of the words that grandma and grandpa wrote, then we're only going to be making a distribution to the kids of like 1%, because the portfolio is only making 3% of stocks and bonds and interest and dividends. And then a couple of percent for the trustee and the attorney and the CPA to do the tax return and stuff. So there's friction. So the beneficiaries aren't getting the benefit that they originally thought. And this is a situation that grandma and grandpa wouldn't or couldn't have anticipated. So the trustee can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do a permissible deviation. I'm going to enter a non-judicial agreement with the kids, the beneficiaries, and say, hey, look, the trust says I'm supposed to only do net income. But when grandma and grandpa did this, they thought that the net income would be much higher than it actually is. So I'm gonna administer this thing a little different. So those are a couple of tips and tricks of how kind of a tool in the trustee's toolbox. Check this out. Pretty sweet. Tool in the trustee's toolbox for how to untie a ticklish knot in the administration when you feel constrained by the language of the trust. You can do a permissible distribution if it doesn't defeat the purposes, the primary purposes of the trust. If If grandma and grandpa couldn't reasonably have anticipated this new fact pattern, if the beneficiaries sign off on it, no sweat. Write it down. Everyone signs it. That's the new way we're going to administer this thing. Hope that's helpful. See you, folks.